Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. At Mint Mobile, we like to do the opposite of what Big Wireless does. They charge you a lot, we charge you a little. So naturally, when they announced they'd be raising their prices due to inflation, we decided to deflate our prices due to not hating you. That's right. We're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This just in, hot off the bench press. Planet Fitness has added new strength equipment. Save $28 or more when you join today, and you can be one of the first to try it out. We're raising the bar with new benches, and our new Hack Squat will have you actually looking forward to leg day. Plus, we're still repping all of the best-in-class equipment we've always had, with most clubs open 24 hours, so you can work out your way on your time. So let's do this. Join Planet Fitness today and save $28 or more. Just $1 down, $15 a month. Cancel anytime. Deal ends January 10th. See Home Club for details.
Super Real.
Hey, I'm Julian Morgans, and you're listening to What It Was Like, the show that asks people who have lived through big, dramatic events what it was like. I vaguely remember when this happened. It was back in 2003. I was a bit younger, I was 16, and the news was full of this story about a man, this pizza delivery driver, who died when a bomb strapped to his neck blew up, just after he had robbed a bank. And since then, the case has become one of those true crime podcast favorites. There was also a Netflix documentary about it back in 2018. And every now and then, I find myself thinking about this case and about the brains behind the operation. A woman named Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong. And today, we're going to meet a criminologist who spent over a decade talking with Marjorie in prison. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's the backstory. On August 28, 2003, at 2:30 p.m., a man named Brian Douglas Wells walked into a bank in the town of Erie, Pennsylvania. Wells was 46 years old, and he had big round glasses, and he was kind of balding on top. And most reports that I can find describe this guy as kind of simple and a bit childlike. He'd been working as a pizza delivery driver for almost 10 years, and he walked quietly into the bank wearing a large white t-shirt with this bulge around his neck. And this guy walked straight up to the teller and slid a note across the bench. And it read this: "Gather employees with access codes to the vault and work fast to fill this bag with $250,000. You have only 15 minutes. And then this man, Wells, he lifted his shirt to reveal a device locked around his neck. It was this steel collar, like a large handcuff, attached to 2 pipe bombs. And Wells told the teller that he couldn't get it off or in any way control it. And he said, "Just give me the money and I'll leave." And the teller told Wells there was no way to get into the vault in that amount of time. So instead, they filled a bag with all of the cash on hand, which came to just under $9,000. Then the teller handed it over and Wells walked out, sucking on a lollipop that he'd grabbed from the counter. As soon as he was out of the bank at 2:38 p.m., a witness called 911 and reported a male leaving the bank with, quote, "a bomb or something wrapped around his neck." This was the first emergency call for the incident. Outside the bank, Wells got into his car and drove off. And we now know that he had a list of instructions to complete that afternoon. Hours later, police found a 9-page letter in his car. This was handwritten instructions from someone telling Wells to rob the bank and then complete kind of like this dark scavenger hunt to collect keys that would slot into the collar to unlock the bomb from around his neck. So after Wells robbed the bank, this was his next instruction, according to the handwritten letter. Exit the bank with the money and go to the McDonald's restaurant. Get out of the car and go into the flower bed to the small sign reading drive-through/open 24 hours. There is a rock with a note taped to the bottom of it by the sign. It has your next directions. Wells drove straight to the McDonald's with his bag of cash after he left the bank, and there he found another 2-page note in the flower bed, telling him to head for a wooded area a few miles away, where he'd find his next set of directions. So he got back in his car. About 15 minutes later, the cops, who were now all over the area looking for anyone who'd robbed a bank, spotted Wells standing near this wooded area in a parking lot. And they surrounded him. They threw him to the pavement and they handcuffed his hands behind his back. And he desperately tried to explain what had happened. He told them that he'd been ambushed by a group of people while he'd been delivering pizzas. And apparently, they'd held him at gunpoint, chained a bomb around his neck, and ordered him to rob the bank. And he was pleading with them. It's going to go off, he told them. Please, I'm not lying. But the officers were understandably suspicious, so they called in the bomb squad. And then they got Wells to sit with his back to a police car while everyone else stood safely back behind their cars with their weapons drawn. Meanwhile, news teams started arriving and filming the whole thing. And now, thanks to these guys, you can watch multiple YouTube clips, all of Brian Wells sitting with his back to a police car, looking very tense. And at one point, he actually called out to one of the cops, "Hey, have you called my boss?" Because apparently he seemed kind of worried that his employer at the pizza shop might think that he was slacking off. Anyway, at around this time, the bomb started to beep, just like in movies. It started with these slow, incremental beeps, like beep, 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 but then it kind of sped up, lending this urgency to the scene. And Wells, he responded in panic, of course, as he would. And again, you can watch on these videos, he starts clawing at the ground with his feet. He's sort of pushing back on his legs, almost like he's trying to slip out of the bomb device. And all of the cops, they kind of crouch down lower behind their cars. And then finally, the bomb went off. And it kind of goes off with this crack, and there's this big puff of smoke. The bomb was actually comprised of 2 steel pipes filled with black powder. So it detonated with this like cracking sound, and it tore a volleyball-sized hole through Wells' neck and his chest. And he slumped over, and he died just there on the ground in the parking lot. And it was 3:18 p.m., and the bomb squad arrived a few minutes later. The first evidence that they found was the handwritten instructions in Wells' car. And the cops all figured that this was probably their best bet to catch whoever had orchestrated all of this. So they started following the clues. And this took them 2 miles south to a small road sign where they found a jar hidden in a bush, but the jar was empty. And it seemed like whoever had come up with this plan, they'd been watching, and they'd called it all off, probably as soon as Wells was arrested. But the big question was who? Who did this? Who had created this depraved treasure hunt and written out these instructions and sent a man running around Erie with a bomb strapped to his neck? Now, the answer to all of these questions is a woman named Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong. And Marjorie was a very rare thing. She was a female serial killer. And like I said earlier, this episode is about unpacking who Marjorie was with someone who knew her really well. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of backstory here, so you're not going into the interview cold. So Marjorie grew up in Erie, where she was an excellent student at the local high school. She had an above-average IQ, but as a teenager, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and she went on to live a pretty chaotic, troubled life. She'd actually murdered 2 boyfriends in the decades earlier, and ultimately she was convicted of masterminding what became known as the pizza bomber case. And for this, she was sentenced to serve life plus 30 years in a federal prison, which is where today's guest met her. Today, I'm speaking with a woman who became Marjorie's friend. Catherine Whiteley is a feminist criminologist and associate professor, and she spent much of her career working with women who have been convicted of violent crimes. Catherine is going to run me through everything she knows about Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong. We'll talk about how they first met, what she learned about Marjorie's past, and what she learned about Marjorie's motivations in strapping a bomb to a man's neck. Also, we'll discuss exactly how this case came about in the months before Brian Wells' death. It's a darkly fascinating story. Okay, so now I bring you Catherine Whiteley. Catherine, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
It's great that you're here. It's great that I'm here.
Yes.
Yeah. You grew up in Queensland, is that right?
I did. I grew up in Dalby in Queensland, southeast Queensland. I was educated there. Then many years later, I went to university later in life. And I completed a PhD, and it was about women incarcerated for violent crimes.
Okay. You describe yourself as a feminist criminologist. Tell me about that.
Okay. So a criminologist is what I am, but the tag or the work that I do through a theoretical lens is through a feminist approach. In other words, I focus on females. I focused on theories of, their pathways to criminality, and I travel the world, and I go into maximum security prisons for women, and I sit down and have conversations, one-on-one conversations with the women about their childhood, about their journey prior to the incarceration, and also whilst they're incarcerated. So, yeah, it all came from being a young girl in Dalby in Queensland.
Okay, so visiting these women who have, a lot of them have received life without parole. This is pretty heavy-duty stuff.
Yes, it is.
Can you just give me a snapshot of what that looks like? Are you going into prisons on a day-to-day basis? What am I imagining?
Well, I'll just take a step back. So I wear several hats. So, of course, I research. As a college professor, you have to conduct research. So in the United States, I've conducted quite a lot of research with women incarcerated for murder that are sentenced for life, which could mean a 30, 35-year sentence, and then they will, shall we say, come up for parole, or women serving life without parole. But going back to how does it feel, what is it like? All those years ago when I first entered the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre here in Melbourne, I had no idea what I was doing. I was going in with, shall we say, an agenda. I'm doing my PhD and I'm wanting to understand the motive and who are these women that committed murder or violent crime. But I was reminded by each of these women in their own narrative. I was reminded that if you need to understand why or the how we committed such a crime, you need to get to know us first. You need to talk to us first. Get to know who we were before we committed the crime. And that stuck with me. So that changed the course of my research agenda. So I've really taken on that project, and all my work really is shaped by talking one-on-one like we are today, sitting with a woman that's incarcerated. And I hear so much from, the trauma, the love, the neglect, the fun, the laughter. We share jokes. It's the humanizing. And I do want to share as a disclaimer, I do not condone violence or any of the violence that they've done. I want to make that very clear. However, when I'm sitting opposite them, I'm seeing that woman today, as someone that I may meet in a corner store or someone I may go shopping with, beyond what she had committed all those years ago.
There's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. You seem to be implying that there's no one real answer. There's no through line. These women are different. Each human has a story, their own baggage, their own pasts. So I think originally I was coming to this at let's just take a case study and that will help to answer all of these questions. Maybe it won't, but we'll try our best.
Okay. Okay.
So I wanted to talk to you about the so-called pizza bomber case. Let's start at the beginning for you. When did you first hear about this case?
Okay, so Marjorie Diehl-Armstrong is the woman that you're referring to. So approximately 10 years ago, 12 years ago, around about that time, I received a letter, a handwritten letter, and it was several pages, and it was from Marjorie. Now, I had not heard about her before anyway, and it was like, Dear Dr. Whiteley, I've heard about you. I know you're coming to the prison, and this is SCI Muncie in Pennsylvania. I'd like you to, come and meet me. It was like 2 or 3 pages long, but the point of her writing to me is that she'd heard about me from other women that I had visited or conducted earlier research with. And she said, will you come up and visit me? And the rationale behind that, it wasn't just because I think she was lonely, but she wanted to have a voice. She was very adamant. I'd like you to come and I'd like to talk to you about supposedly, allegedly, my innocence. But I'd also like to meet you because I've heard a lot about you. And so Within a week or two, I decided I would make arrangements to go and visit her. And it's approximately a good nearly 3-hour drive from where I live to the Women's State Correctional Institution, SCI Muncie. It's in a very pretty rural area of Pennsylvania. So I drove to the prison and went through the procedures, the gates, etc. there. And I will share, SCI Muncie has any time between 14 and 1,500 women there. So it's a big state prison. It's one of two in Pennsylvania. So I remember going through all the gates, as I mentioned, and sitting down, in the actual family visitors waiting room. And the next minute I heard this, Dr. Whiteley. And, we're in this environment, you really have to keep it a little bit low key, And anyway, and I stood up and she come towards me and she spoke very, very fast, but was very excited to see me. And she sat beside me and I said, well, hello, Marjorie. And she started to talk, and really it was like I'd known her for a long time. And she opened up and said, I shouldn't be here. I've been charged and I want to fight the charges. So, even years later, she'd been in that state prison for several years on an earlier charge. And it was like she was excited to see me and she's chatting and speaking very fast. I couldn't keep up with her. It was all about she was innocent in her mind and still to the day that she passed. She was innocent and always saying, I need help for someone to help me. And I'm in a situation, I don't go down that legal path because of the situation. There are times you want to help, but you can't because I work engage with several hundred women. And it's like you do something for one woman, then you have and there's only one of me. And this is, years later. Yeah. So anyway, I'm going to say we had a wonderful conversation. She was loud, bold.
What did she look like?
Okay, Marjorie had grey, short hair, disheveled a little bit, but then some women are when you're living inside a prison too. But she also liked the point that I was an Australian. And then she shared with me she loved to fish, she loved to hunt, and, she loved the outdoors. So anyway, we spoke about different things and because she did suffer from bipolar, okay? So there was times that she would talk so fast and then she'd change the subject. And I'm trying to keep up with her. But there was one situation, my first time, as I said, I'm sitting there with her for a couple of hours and a woman walked past and here's Marjorie and she happened to comment about how bad that woman was. And I'm like, okay. And I'm just trying to, change the subject and hopefully ask her to sort of, we'll tone it down a little bit. And then by the end of that 2.5 hour conversation, I found that she had, when she was a younger woman, had killed a man, shot a man in self-defense when she was a younger woman. And then she was serving time at the moment in the state prison for having shot another man. And I'm sitting there and thinking, and then you've got a third case, Marjorie. You're going to be sentenced for the pizza bomber. But she was quickly to point out someone else was worse than her. And I'm like, okay, so I go in often very blind is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, and you just learned in real time that 3 people had died at her hands.
That's right. She had either pulled the trigger or been an accomplice. Absolutely. And so that was Marjorie.
Her mental health's been debated a lot in all the trials and on the media. Yes. Like, did she read a little crazy to you, or
I won't even say the word crazy because to me, because I'm so close to many of the women know what they have done. She did have mental challenge. When I say she did have challenges, and I believe it was her late teens that she was diagnosed with bipolar. But then there's also a part of Marjorie that was so bright, her IQ, and I witnessed this many times. She was so bright, and you can also understand Marjorie being a manipulator, or Marjorie, she's a great manipulator too, but you can also, in that, the crime which we talked about as a pizza bomber in Erie, Pennsylvania, you can see how she immersed herself in the fun. There's this narcissism, there's this manipulation, there's the joy of someone being hurt, or there were pieces of her, shall we say, personality, that were complex, but she certainly had the ability to be part of a crime like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's a good way of putting it.
Oh, absolutely. But no, I do believe that there were, well, I'll share. Marjorie wrote to me several times, other than me just visiting, and she did talk always about the mental health. And she believed that if she had been diagnosed earlier or more attention given to her mental health, that the, shall we say, 2/3 convictions that she had, or the 2 convictions, and the third was, like, as I said, it was a domestic violence, she would not be incarcerated or wouldn't have allegedly committed any of the crimes. So, yeah, no, I do believe, absolutely. And in her writing, it was all over the place. As I said, she'd start a sentence and talk about something, next minute, we're talking about something completely different. So it was very, very hard to understand, So Marjorie is a complex person, but I have to say she would have me in stitches laughing, or trying not to laugh, because it's like I'm not trying to encourage her to share a joke or call a spade a spade. She would call someone or something out, and you either cringed or you laughed along with her. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
But yes, Marjorie was a high IQ, very intelligent.
Can you give me an example of a moment where she said something, or I don't know, there was the sophistication of a joke or something where you went, wow, that's pretty smart?
Yes. Well, she would often talk about her school years, and like she was an honors student, like we'd say ducks of a college. She was, her education, she was always high, in the higher group of her class, her education. But what could I say? She loved to read, and she would quote or reference someone I'd never heard about, something from history, something within history, and she loved poetry. Now, I have to say, Gillian, I had no idea. I have to go home and literally look up who she was talking about. And I'm talking through an academic realm, not a novel she's picked up.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So.
Okay. Something I want to do here is I want to get your read on who Marjorie was. That's really what this is about. Because, went through the trial. There's 1,000,001 true crime podcasts out there about like, here's what happened.
Yes.
And Netflix had this documentary called Evil Genius, which sort of tells a bio in itself. I want your read on Marjorie's bio. Like, how would you tell her story after knowing her as long as you did?
So I have written about Marjorie in a couple of places. So I will start with the Marjorie that spoke to me had shared that growing up that she was abused. And again, this is alleged. I can't point any finger, but her words in her letters and our conversation, and there was a very poor relationship with her father. Marjorie was an only child, and there was loneliness, and she put all her energy into her education. She was a high achiever. Her mother was a teacher. Her father, I believe, was a salesman. And they were, maybe you could say even years ago, upper working class or upper middle class. And, how would I describe her? As I said, witty, funny, intelligent, but then could change just like that. And even the letters, and she talks about her childhood. There were moments the aggression would set in. Marjorie was often loud, but it was also, there was an aggressiveness there as well when she wanted the point, to be made. Now, Marjorie also, and I want to share this, she was a hoarder. And years later, we talk about diagnoses and that too, that also can be part of her mental illnesses there, because she was a hoarder. Her home was literally...
Throughout her life?
Most of her life, absolutely. Okay. I don't know what she was like in the prison because it's very strict.
Yeah,
so, but I do know even with her letters, she would write to me, but it was like, help me. But there was also that rambling, that constant, it was like repetitive of the rambling, or when are you coming to see me? But overall, stepping back, you would think that she had a really great upper middle class life growing up.
Sure.
It wasn't until her late 20s, etc., that the involvement with a man that she said was abusing her, not her father, but a man that was abusing her, and she killed him in self-defense.
This was her boyfriend at the time.
That's correct.
And he was violent.
That's what she has said, and yes, she wasn't convicted for that. But yes, that's exactly it. He was abusive towards her, and she did, and again, putting into perspective, She was an outdoors person, so having a gun or a rifle in the home wasn't like out of the ordinary, for her. She was a very outdoors person. So, but it was there, and yes, her first, we could say victim, if you wish.
Sure, yeah. And then I understand it was sort of a history repeating itself kind of thing, where her next boyfriend ended up dead as well.
Yes, he did. He was found in the freezer of a home where when they were seeking, when I say they, the law enforcement was seeking more information regarding who was, shall we say, who are the perpetrators of the man that lost his life, known as the pizza bomber victim.
Yeah.
Anyway, they discovered a man in the freezer, and he had been shot, and Marjorie had done that, and she received, I think it was anywhere from, I don't know, 7 to 20 years, or whichever for that. And that's when I met her. She was sentenced for that, whilst also they're investigating the pizza bomber. So it was with Marjorie, she was sentenced in a state prison, and that's where I met her. But she also, for the pizza bomber, on top of that, so that 7 to 20 years or whichever it was, I can't quite remember. But she was also served or charged federally, because it was a bank that that they robbed, and of course the man had lost his life. So she was never, ever going to be released. So she received, I think it was 30 years or life plus 30 years was a sentence. Could you believe that, in a federal prison?
Yeah.
And that's where she died. I think it was in 2018.
Okay.
She died.
She died of breast cancer, is that right?
Well, she had breast cancer, but it's very interesting when you say that, because it's written that she died of natural causes, and yet she had breast cancer. So I would put two and two together and say that's exactly it.
Right.
My biggest regret with Marjorie is that the couple of years that she was there, I did not have the chance to visit. And I received a couple letters. Just the last letter was just before she passed. And this was Marjorie. Where are you? Haven't heard from you. What have you been doing? And, how about a visit? And it was, this is that bit of aggression. And she was peeved with me. But I do have a personal regret in that period of time, I never got to say goodbye.
So at this point, we've learned a bit about Marjorie's childhood and what she was like as an adult. Catherine also mentioned that Marjorie had murdered 2 of her former boyfriends, which is kind of a story for another episode. So let's just jump into the early 2000s, when Marjorie was still living in Erie, Pennsylvania, and she was hanging around with this group of kind of ragtag intellectuals. These were guys who were all known to the local police over various petty charges. They liked to drink, take drugs, and sit around having big conversations. And one day, Marjorie admitted to her friends that she was worried that her dad was spending her inheritance. And one of her mates offered to kill him, to kill her father, for $250,000. And Marjorie agreed. And prosecutors claim it was actually Marjorie's idea to rob a bank to get the money to pay for her father's assassination. They also claim that the bomb collar and the scavenger hunt was basically like a really complex attempt to obscure her involvement. And Brian Wells, the pizza delivery driver, he was known to the group through a local sex worker, and he was chosen to be the fall guy to deliver the bomb just because he owed them money, and he was something of a simpleton. So on August 28th, 2003, Mamma Mia's Pizzeria in Erie got a call for 2 pizzas at 1:30 p.m. And Wells took the order. 2 pizzas to be delivered to 8631 Peach Street, which, he looked on a map, just a few miles out of town. But the address turned out to be a really remote spot. It was a dirt road leading to a TV transmission tower. And what happened when Wells got there is still kind of unclear. Law enforcement claims that Wells got there to discover that the plan wasn't exactly what he thought. They claim that he'd originally been in on it. He'd been told, hey, we're going to strap a fake bomb to you. You'll get a cut of the proceeds from the bank robbery and everything will be great. But when he got there, they claim that he'd actually been double-crossed. The story that emerged during the court case was that Wells had driven out down the end of this road beneath the TV tower only to be ambushed by Marjorie and several others, and he was forced to wear the bomb at gunpoint. And a man named Floyd Stockton later admitted that he was the one who had built the bomb and physically locked it around Wells' neck. He said that Marjorie had personally measured Wells' neck, and the device was built to her specifications. And apparently when Wells realized the bomb was real, one of the guys reportedly fired a pistol to intimidate him into compliance. Witnesses also reported hearing a gunshot around the same time from this area, which seems to corroborate this. In the end, the jury sided with the prosecution. Marjorie was found to be the mastermind, while the other 3 men executed the plan. And on February 28, 2011, she was sentenced to life in prison to be served alongside the prison term already imposed for killing her boyfriend. And it was there that she became friends with my guest, Catherine Whiteley. Okay, so that's the story of how it all went down. We're going to take a quick ad break now, but we're going to be right back to unpack Marjorie's motivations. Because as you're going to hear from Catherine, it wasn't really about money.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This just in, hot off the bench press. Planet Fitness has added new strength equipment. Save $28 or more when you join today, and you can be one of the first to try it out. We're raising the bar with new benches, and our new hack squat will have you actually looking forward to leg day. Plus, we're still repping all of the best-in-class equipment we've always had, with most clubs open 24 hours, so you can work out your way on your time. So let's do this. Join Planet Fitness today and save $28 or more. Just $1 down, $15 a month, cancel anytime. Deal ends January 10th. See Home Club for details.
So what's the motivation here? I mean, you describe it as a game, or you say that she thought it was like a game.
The game for Marjorie was always like, because she was so smart, it's like a jigsaw puzzle, putting all the pieces together and then standing back and waiting for it to happen. Okay. It was almost like an excitement for her. I believe in knowing Marjorie, and I've known her for many years, the game was also a thrill for her too.
Yeah, yeah. So did you get a glimpse of the Marjorie who was perfectly capable of putting a pipe bomb around a man's neck?
Well, I certainly did get a glimpse of the Marjorie that could be deemed deceitful, and I certainly did.
I guess what I'm asking is, yes, did she have a little thread of evil through her?
Well, okay, this is my point. I've seen Marjorie has always been portrayed as evil, or the evil genius. Now, she was a genius, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say that she was sick before she was evil. I'm going to say she was mentally sick before she became evil. That's how I'm going to place it.
But they're different. You're differentiating evil and sick.
I'm saying evil came later on, and I believe that's part, and I'm not going to use it as the excuse to pathologize that because she had, bipolar, et cetera, and she had other mental challenges, that that should excuse her.
Yeah.
But I do believe, and I say this with several women that I come across, that if they had been or sought the help that they needed at the time, and we're talking many years ago, maybe she wouldn't have carried out the crimes that she did. So I would always share that. I would go out on a limb and say that she was, there was a mental illness, the mental illness, or it was dormant, or it was there before she was evil, because what she carried out was absolutely evil. You know what I mean?
I want to continue pulling on this thread, because I feel like there's something here that I still don't quite understand.
Sure.
And that is that, regardless of the terminology you use, regardless of whether you say, hey, that person's evil, kind of doesn't matter. Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, some people derive pleasure from hurting others.
Sure, absolutely.
Sadism exists.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Was there a bit of sadism about Marjorie?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely. I won't sugarcoat that. Absolutely. Yeah. When I would talk to Marjorie, or she would do all the talking, it was almost like she herself would sensationalize the crime a little.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
She was enthusiastic at times to talk about the crime, but also then to further highlight that she was someone that knew these people but was not involved to the extreme or the extent that she was. Yeah.
Okay.
No, absolutely.
Okay. Did she enjoy her newfound fame?
Well, when you say through what lens? When you say newfound fame?
Well, this was a very this was a highly televised case.
Yes.
People are still talking
Yes.
about it now. It's
Yes.
become, one of those sort of internet cases that
Isn't
people
that
obsess
interesting?
over.
Yes.
Did
yes.
was she aware of this at the time, and did she sort of relish that attention?
When I first met her, she shared with me that there was a book being written about her, and there was a book from a detective that worked on her case. She knew that she was being sensationalized, and she, don't get me wrong, yes, she would like that or would have liked that, but she wasn't privy to the amount what we're seeing today or understanding. Put it this way, she certainly got her dream, but I don't really mean in the perspective of being deemed the evil one. But yeah, she did. Wherever she is, if she could see how she has been highlighted or sensationalized, she'd be smiling.
Yeah,
absolutely.
She'd be happy
Yeah, she
about
would. She would.
about you and I having a
Oh,
conversation.
absolutely. And you know what? I'm glad we are.
Yeah.
I'm glad we are. Yeah, I am, because I said I would write her story, but not in the perspective that other media resources do. I don't go about the crime. I write her story about the person she was and that I got to know.
Yeah. There would be a lot of people who are listening to this who would just draw the line, the friendship line at murder. They'd be like, how can you be friends with someone who's killed someone?
Oh, Gillian, this is why I do the work I do. If we all had that attitude, we'd never learn from these women. My goal is that these women can be the best educators for us in understanding what motivates women to do what they do. They're telling us, they're sharing their stories. So, and the work I do, it's not work, Julian. It's not for me.
Yeah. So what did you learn from Marjorie?
I think for Marjorie, it was a lot more about sadness, because here is someone from the outside looking in that really, she could do anything, be any, you know what I mean? But for some people outside, or some of the women that are incarcerated that I work with, they never had that opportunity of an education or being the centre of attention. They never had that. But then Marjorie, again, and this is alleged only, that her relationship with her father was unhealthy.
Mm. As an outsider, it seems to me that the through line with all of these stories seems to be some sort of childhood trauma.
You could.
Does that
yes,
seem
certainly.
correct?
Well, you could. You could say that 3/4 of the women, again, I'm looking at the lifers or life without parole women, you could say that approximately 70, 75% of them, maybe up to 80%, have been victimized, if it's neglect, if it's sexual, physical, emotional abuse, some path or some part of their pathway to the crime that they committed. But I want to throw something in here, and it's not about Marjorie, but I also work with female sex offenders. And what you'll find is the victimization of many of the females that have sexually offended is almost on par with some of the women, with many of the women that have committed murder.
I think when I'm sort of examining why I'm finding this so interesting, it's just this idea that, men commit violent crime. We all know this.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think there's this like pop psychology notion that women only commit to violent crime when they themselves have been a victim, and it's somehow an expression of their like inner turmoil. I want to explore that a little bit. Like,
Sure.
It does sound to me like that's kind of correct then.
Well, you'll find that there is the smaller percentage of the women, and possibly, like I shared earlier on, that will do or re-offend if they want it. They'll say, I do it all over again. But there's a greed. That component is usually women that it's greed / financial, you're going to take the children away from me, etc. So it's more blatant and rather than a premeditated or, with many of the women that I have, sadly, it's with children that you will find, a larger percentage of those, it's been more premeditated than as opposed to spontaneous with some of the women that have killed their children. So, we mustn't, and I think I'm trying to share, Gillian, is that it's so, because I've been doing this for 20 years, it's so hard to box women in because, a woman has killed a child. Well, all the women that have killed a child or a baby must have had a very similar, motivation or path or journey to that particular crime. It just differs. It can differ. But overall, there is a percentage of women that it's greed, as I said, greed, jealousy, just like males. I mean, women can commit, violent crimes just like men. The interesting statistic in the United States is that if the women serving life and life without parole, no matter what age, but overall, if they were ever to be released, it's less than 1% would ever reoffend. And I'm saying literally reoffend. But if males it's a larger percentage of males that have committed violent crimes in the United States, but overall, it's I don't know, it's up to between the 50 and 60% that a male would reoffend. I'm not saying a violent crime, but would definitely reoffend. So the rates are so much higher. It is interesting. The rates are so much higher for a male to reoffend if previously he had committed a violent crime and was released, as opposed to a woman. It's like less than 1% would ever reoffend. And that's because, and I hear it from the women, or they tell me, all we want to do is go home. We just want to curl up and be by ourselves. We want to be with our family or whatever surviving family or friends are usually alive. Because again, these women that I engage with, as I said, Gillian, they're really, they've been in the system 20, 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, these aren't just like short-termers coming into the system and going. So the simple little pieces of what we love about life or we take for granted, that's what the women focus on, cooked meal or, But again, I'm not condoning what they did, but it's very simplistic what their needs are, but also to be left alone.
Okay. Do you think that had she been let out, Marjorie would have reoffended?
I'm not going to sit on the fence. I would be concerned.
Okay.
That's how I'm going to say it. I possibly would be concerned, but I can't say if she would or what.
Just because she was sufficiently scattered and there was enough sort of underlying malevolence.
I think is that she had already committed the crimes previously and still not acknowledging literally that she was part of the cohort. Or I think the denial is a hesitancy for me, and also she was older and where psychologically she was at the time too. So yeah, I think I would be hesitant to be confident of her being released and not recommitting a crime. I'm not going to say murder, but I would say a crime.
Sure.
And I think that's to do, as I said, with her state of mind at the time. Because she was older when I met her as opposed to being a little younger, as we know.
I probably just have a few more questions. And I was wondering if you could tell me about the very last time that you saw Marjorie.
The last time was... Again, she passed away in 2018, so it could have been about 2016, 2015, before she was transferred to federal prison. So she had written, as she always did, and complaining I hadn't visited her. So I remember, again, going in, sitting, and we probably had a conversation for about an hour. Now, I was unaware that she was going to be transferred to a federal medical centre, but it was still a prison. And because of her health as well, and of course of the crime, a federal crime. But she was, I didn't even know about the cancer at that time until it came later on in her letter. She was upbeat, but she was still arguing, or still sharing with me that I'm innocent. They're sentencing, or they've sentenced an innocent woman. That's what she would say. Can you? And she always still asked to the very end, sitting there, well, can you help me? Or also I got, well, you're not helping me enough. And I will share one of the last conversations I had with her was that, as we know, there was a Netflix series, Evil Genius. And again, the disturbing part for me is always focusing on the evil and the genius. And Marjorie I, got to know, her being painted, the picture that she was painted. Marjorie told me about a producer had been in contact with her, etc., and was going to do a film or a documentary, however she said that. And I'm sitting there going, oh, well, that's really good. So anyway, and she had asked me in her letter, she had said to me, would you represent me? Would you share my story? In other words, it wasn't about the crime or criminality. It was about me, us, me getting to know the Marjorie that was sitting beside me, not the convicted Marjorie. And I said, certainly. And she gave me the information of the person who was producing the document, or the people. And again, I'm not pinpointing the documentary as such and who they are, but she had made it clear that she really she wanted me to represent her to some capacity. And it's in the letter, and no one contacted me.
Okay.
And then the documentary was successfully released.
Did you like the documentary?
I think I believe that they shared the story. It was very true what happened. I will go out on a limb and say the word saddened me, again, the focus or the emphasis on Marjorie. So I can't say, again, they did the research, the producers, the directors did the research, and the story, absolutely, they did their research and investigation. But the way that Marjorie was represented, and it's not to shine light that she was an angel and she was the greatest, but she did ask for me to she would have liked me to talk about the Marjorie that I got to meet. Right.
Yeah. It sounds to me like you got a more three-dimensional, less embellished version of Marjorie.
Mm.
So you've been doing this job for a couple of decades.
Yes.
What would you like the world to know about women who commit violent crimes?
Mm-hmm. My goal is that if you get the chance to hear directly from a woman, no matter what country you are, speak about her experience, no matter if it's through a podcast like mine or through research, please do so. Please do so. Because I think society can be less judgmental. I think society can heal with understanding too, because what some of these women have endured prior to committing that crime, or making the choice to commit the crime, or spontaneously committing the crime, it could be many of us women in society today.
Yeah.
So please take a step back, and if you get the chance, directly hearing it from the women or the woman is really important.
I think that's a good message. Catherine, thank you so much for sharing your story, for sharing Marjorie's story. This has been fascinating. It's been a really interesting ride.
Thank you, Julian. I appreciate the opportunity, and I know the women, when I go back to the United States and share that I'm on your podcast, they'll want to know a lot about that. They any opportunity, if I say I'm traveling and going to talk about them, they get pretty excited, and then I have to send letters and let them know how I'm going. So thank you, and to your audience for taking the time to listen.
Thanks a lot. If you've enjoyed this conversation with Catherine, you really should check out her podcast. It's called Self-Identities, and she talks to women who have been sentenced for murder in US prisons. Many of them were actually sentenced on death row, and they share their life stories, past and present. It's really good. It's called Self-Identities, and it's on Apple and Spotify. Today's episode was produced by Rachel Tuffery. It was mixed by Jimmy Saunders, who also did our theme music. Daniela Cantu and Chloe Stelling are our interns. Our cover art is by Naomi Lee Beveridge, and this whole thing has been a Super Ill production.